Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience, business continuity, COVID, well-being, crisis management, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there. I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. A couple of quick announcements. I will be at the Continual Resilience Today conference in Toronto in November of this year, 2022, and I will also be giving a keynote speech, co-presenting, by the way, with Margaret Millett at the BCI, I think they're calling it a hybrid world this year at 2022, also in November. And fingers crossed, that'll be in person. Today, if you're looking at the video, you might recognize my guest. He's been here. I think this is going to be the fourth appearance. And I'd like to welcome back Dr. Gavriel Schneider. Gav, welcome back.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be back. Always happy to chat to you.
Yeah, always great. And I know, just to let people know, we were having a little chat before we started recording that from our previous discussions, we usually ask the first question and then we're off somewhere else. And we just keep going. But they're always fun. They're always enlightening, lots of sharing of ideas and thoughts. So I'm glad to have you back.
Thanks, Alex. Look forward to this. Happy to get started whenever you're ready. Yes. I think the challenge, we've got a big topic today, so keeping it into a small package is not going to be easy.
No, it's not. And speaking of which, because you mentioned topic, we're going to talk about skill sets and attributes for leadership, resilience, and crisis management practitioners. So my first question to you, because it's in the title, skill sets and attributes, what's the difference? Or aren't they the same?
Great question. And I think this is one of those important pieces we need to get right before we talk about who should be doing a job and the skills they then need to do the job. So I think, it does actually lead back to the nature versus nurture discussion. What are the natural things we're able to do, the natural things we're good at versus the things we can build and develop. So, I think realistically, there are differences. Even if we look at the field of resilience, risk, crisis management, even within that, there's no one size fits all. These are the attributes versus these are the skill sets you need. But to directly answer your question, attributes are those intangible, technical, almost soft skills that we have. And most of the time they're intrinsic. They're things you arrive with. However, we can take time to refine, build, and develop our attributes. And definitely research has shown us that, practice, rehearsal, and dedication to improving attributes can lead to a very high level of capability from an attribute perspective. Skill sets directly are exactly what they sound like, right? A skill is something I'm able to apply or do. So something like doing business continuity planning would be a skill set, right? Underpinning skill set fundamentally is knowledge. And if I don't have the knowledge, then I can't apply the skill set effectively. To be effective, we need both, right? You want people with the right attributes, the right skill set underpinned by the correct fundamental knowledge. Otherwise, we just land up with pretty poor results. And you know me by now, I'm all about high performance. How do we get the most out of whatever limited resourcing we've got?
Well, what about people that have attributes? Because I mentioned this before we started recording too. So introverts and extroverts, they're going to come with maybe the same skill set, the same IT knowledge, let's say, but they're going to deal with people and issues differently. So how do you get them so they're, I don't want to say the same, but kind of on an even field that they can work with anybody? How do you tone down someone who's really out there, and how do you lift up someone who's likes to stay back?
It's a real interesting point. And I think part of the challenge we've got is what we discussed in previous episodes, that historically, we were really focused on managerialism centricity, where jobs would align to a hierarchy. The outcomes or KPIs of that job would be designed specifically for what the organization wanted out of that job. And then we try and recruit the human that fills that.
Mhm.
We've seen two problems with that. There's more, but two main problems from a risk resilience perspective. One, things change so quickly. People have to be multi-skilled and multifaceted, because if I can only do one thing, but a disruption occurs or an opportunity
Mhm.
needs to be pursued, then we can't capitalize on that. And two, the other big challenge we've got is people are not engaged if they're not playing to their strengths and things that land up motivating. So in essence, if we don't get the mix and match of those two things right, we get demotivated staff who are doing jobs that they thought they'd be good at or maybe wanted to do, but in practice aren't, based on what's happening around them. So I think the challenge is a little bit bigger than extrovert, introvert. Realistically, you actually need the ambivert, right? The person who can work really well on their own and can just get on with stuff, but also the person who can work really well in a team. And I think this is part of the challenge, that if we look at large organizations who have the luxury of being able to recruit multiple resources to achieve objectives, they can build a business resilience, crisis management, risk structure, which is made up of people who have both skill sets. Some who are really good at just plodding away at doing robust, systematic planning and are very happy to not talk to anybody and just produce piles and piles of documentation.
Uh-huh.
And then they can get the dynamic extrovert who can educate, lead, inspire, and share. But realistically, very few organizations have that. The vast majority are landing up with people who have to do more than one thing.
Well,
So
that leads
it's a
me to the
challenge.
next. You mentioned play to your strengths, or, people playing to their strengths. And there's a book by Marcus Buckingham, I think, if I'm hoping I remember that right. It's the book that actually set me on my path. Now go find your strength, or something along that lines. Why is it then, see, we're already going off topic. Why is it then that leaders and managers quite often point out the weaknesses in people, saying you need to improve these skill sets? Meanwhile, one of their attributes is that they're fantastic at bringing people together. They're fantastic at coordinating things. They're fantastic at communicating. But the thing that gets zeroed in on is you need to improve your programming skill for whatever. Why can't we play to our strengths?
So I think a few things. And I would ask your listeners to look back on our previous episodes, because I'm not going to recover the same ground.
Yeah.
But one of the big challenges we've got now is the majority of people in leadership positions were trained to be very good managers. They were not trained to lead, they were trained to manage. The process of management is a systematic process of organizing limited resources to get a consistent output. Right? Leadership is around inspiring, motivating, and being able to adapt quickly and effectively to what will achieve the best outcomes. So while we talk about the two like they're a bundled skill set, they're not, right? You get exceptionally good managers who are terrible leaders. You get great leaders who are terrible managers.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So to your point, one of the big challenges we've got is the majority of people in senior levels today weren't trained to lead, they were trained to manage. And we haven't grown, let's say, executive managers and leaders with both skill sets as fundamental requirements for people to climb the ladder. Therefore, for them, if they don't do it or can't do it, they don't recognize that others could. So we're still stuck in this weird place of, hey, we want to be agile. We want to play to people's strengths. We want to be this, inspired, motivated, collegiate workforce. But in reality, when it comes down to scale, any business bigger than 8 people realistically starts becoming a tribe of tribes, not just one tribe. And as soon as you've got that, without managerialism, it's hard to get consistency. So I think the core problem that we've got to overcome is finding that balance. And we actually coined a term called dynamic risk equilibrium, DRE. And there's an article if people want to Google it or drop me a note, happy to share it. And this is the balance between risk seeking and risk aversion. And it's a dynamic balance, but you can apply the same concept back to leadership and managerialism. And it's really interesting when we start looking at how this stuff applies, like even a bit of neuroscience, right? We've seen research, from neuroscientists and experts, which show that even our neural circuitry switches. So we can't be both emotive and factual at the same time. We actually seesaw between the two. And anybody interested in that can look at the work of Dr. Matthew Lieberman on that stuff. He calls it the neural seesaw because we literally go back and forward. So to your point, and that's probably a long-winded way of answering your question, the big challenge we fundamentally got is people are not taught how to manage the neural seesaw for themselves. So when they're trying to do it with others, it fails. And to your point, going back to some of the things we discussed on previous episodes, part of the brain, that reticular activating system that filters all our information, only does that based on fear or interest. So generally speaking, if I'm not interested, the only way to get people moving is fear. And, the more I poke you about your weak points, the more that triggers our fight and flight response, and the worse we perform. So it's an interesting juggling act. So back to the bigger picture of how does this work? It takes a lot of self-knowledge of the leader first, before you can actually get your individual team members to play to their strengths. And it's, anybody who's had to run high-performing teams or manage a significant amount of people, particularly in countries like ours, Australia, the US, Canada, the UK, where we do have this balance between treating our staff well and riding them really hard. And it's an awkward balance in different ways. And that requires a different way of thinking for the world we're in. So if we look at resilience, business continuity, and risk, those are all dynamic environments. They're not static. So if, for example, you were the production or the quality manager in a factory that had a conveyor belt system, and your job was to make sure that system keeps functioning, that's not a very dynamic job. You're not required to quickly absorb information and analyze that information, interpret it, and then put it into some sort of quick action plan.
Right. It's just repetitive.
Exactly right. So, jobs like that are really well suited to people with a managerialism centricity. Yeah, I would say risk, business continuity to a degree, and it depends on where people focus on the spectrum, because, introverted, managerialism-centric people can do very well in business continuity if they focus on the planning phase and the documentation and governance side of it. They do very poorly when you ask them to, do crisis management team training and exercising, and then run incident response teams.
Yeah. You're kind of taking them out of their comfort zone, dropping in somewhere else, and it just doesn't fit.
And I'm sure you've seen this too. Like, we see this all the time with our consulting practice, particularly larger, more mature organizations who have well-developed incident and emergency management and crisis management systems. They'll still put people on those crisis management teams that don't want to be there, don't like working under the intense pressure, don't want the responsibility of having to make quick calls, but because hierarchically they hold a management position, they're put into these quick response teams, for lack of a better description.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what you call it.
Yeah.
And they can't perform.
Yeah, I've talked about that before, where sometimes these people that come together on some sort of a response team on a normal day-to-day basis, they don't even have interaction with most of these other people, because their role, their business as usual, daily job, whatever that is, could be management, could be data input, doesn't matter. They don't interact with these other people. Then you've got a crisis, as you just said, you bring them all together, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know who you are.
No, your point is exactly right. And I think since we've chatted, both my business and myself have been getting a lot more into cybersecurity and the world of cybersecurity and incident response virtually. And again, we're finding, in fact, when you look at the virtual domain, it's magnified more so than most other domains, because you've got these high-level technical experts who might be really good at coding or, as you said, data input. They might even, from a cybersecurity perspective, be very good at setting up cybersecurity systems, but they can't deal with it when things break and the human comes into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
So, to your point, we actually, the game has to change. We've got to start looking at how do we develop multifaceted, multi-skilled people as we move forward. And, easy to say in theory, but where do people go to learn this stuff? What are the skill sets that they need to develop based on where they are? And we've gotten into trouble once or twice where, consulting for clients, I've said, first thing you should be doing before we set up your emergency management, incident response, business continuity, and crisis management teams and portfolios is we should do some sort of psychometric or personality testing. So we know who you've got, and we can set them up to succeed. And the
does that scare people?
The feedback we got is that's discriminatory and
Really?
you can't do it. Where my take was quite different. It's, don't you want to set your people up for success, as opposed to try and squash people into boxes where they don't have the skill set nor the attributes. Skill set is easier, you can train it. Attributes you can develop, but you can't take somebody, for example, who's never run in their lives and expect them to perform at the level of a marathon runner.
Right. Yeah. Well, if I was looking for someone to fill, let's say, the crisis management lead, or really any position, what would I look at first? The human side or the soft skill attributes, or the technical stuff? And I know we have to, there has to be a combination of both, give or take in each area, but which one is the defining factor?
So you specifically said crisis management lead. So, we need to unpack, what does that job require? What is the job to be done by a crisis management lead? So, I think there's a few general things that most people would agree on, and that's somebody who can work under pressure, somebody who can get various stakeholders to align, somebody who can leverage the knowledge of experts, and somebody who understands how to keep things running when people are highly panicked and highly stressed. So if you look at just that little list that I went through, the majority of those things are attributes, not skills. So, I think one of the things we've got to be doing is going, what is the job I'm recruiting for? And what do we need to do to make sure the person we hire is successful? Now, it's an interesting conundrum, because you could take somebody who can do all of that stuff really well, but they have no interest in crisis management or business continuity or risk. And if there's no interest,
they have no influence in their organization either.
Well, let's separate those two things, because I think influence is a very important variable to come back to.
Okay.
So let's talk about interest first. So if they have no interest, they're never going to perform well for you. So even though they've got the attributes and you could teach them the skills, without that interest, you're just wasting your time. Because in essence, that person, they may very well take it on for other motivators, status, hierarchy, money, some of those sort of drivers. But realistically, it's going to be a short-term piece for them until they move on to something that does interest them. Back to your point about influence.
And you could be pushing them away too. Even though you think as a manager or director, VP, whatever, I'm promoting this person up because, I think they're great, wonderful. If that person doesn't want to do it, to use your word, they have no interest in it, then I could be setting them up to walk out the door, start looking for something else where they don't have to do that because they don't want that extra role.
Well, to your point, even if we get people who are very loyal, who will do whatever the organization wants of them, we're just going to wear them down and they're going to break quicker. So it's a very interesting dynamic when we start looking at, what is the job I need to fill versus what are the skills, attributes, and requirements I want to fill that job. And there's lots of schools of thought within the world of HR around this. And, I have to say, I talk a lot to HR experts too. And it's one of those, whatever the new fad is, that's what we'll focus on, as opposed to, we know this is always the way it works. So I think there's a few variables and we'll go into influence again, because your point is really, really strong on that. What do we need holistically? And I think this is where we often make the mistake that we go, here's the job description, I'll recruit only on that job description. And then it turns out that job description was great for what happened 4 years ago, is not great for what's coming in the next 6 months to 3 years.
Yeah.
And almost always we're finding managerialism-centric functions, which ironically HR is one of those. It's gone from how do we motivate, protect our people, to how do we apply CYA, cover your ass, in the way we onboard, retain, and offboard staff. And I always feel sorry for many of the HR professionals I work with, because most of them get into HR because they want to work with people and make a difference. And realistically, they become, policy stroke rule enforcers.
Politicians almost.
Yeah, 100%. And over a period of time, they get so eroded with the purpose of what they do that it just becomes, play by the numbers, follow the rules, as opposed to, hold on a second, how do we get the best outcomes? for the
Yeah.
individual, the team, and the organization. Very different skill set. Let's talk about influence, though, because you did bring that up. So I think this is another piece, too, that we often get wrong. I know we're talking about skills, attributes, practitioners and leaders, but realistically, and we've all seen this happen over and over and over again, whether it's risk, resilience, business continuity, crisis management, they tend to get lumped in a little pile, and you get a person or a small team who's responsible for those functions. And realistically, without a layer of influence and hierarchical support, their ability to actually implement or apply their skill sets fails.
Mhm.
So you tend to find that these experts who could add significant value basically get stuck drawing up policy, maintaining manuals and business continuity plans, doing risk assessments that nobody reads or looks at. When things break, they may or may not be contacted. They may or may not be part of the crucial role of making sure things work smoothly. And most definitely, they don't get engaged in the lessons learned, continuous evolution and development of the organizational capability. So to your point, I don't think there's a perfect place in an organization for those structures to be sitting. What I think is critically important is that the executive team understands why they need those skill sets, why they need people who come with those skill sets, and how do we empower those people to do the best for our organization and the executive team. Because without that understanding, you're going to fail.
If you like that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.